Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be reviewing the play A Doll's House, written by Henrik Ibsen. This play came out in 1879. It was originally written in Danish, the author was Norwegian, and I read the Dover Thrift edition, and there's a note inside that says it's a reprinting of a translation that was anonymous, so I don't know who translated it to English. I read this play because I recently read Mrs. Warren's Profession, and I really like that. I like the Victorian era stuff that isn't quite what you'd expect from that time period, and I've heard several different people compare this play to Mrs. Warren's Profession, so I thought it would be interesting to read. So this is the story of a married couple, Nora and Torvald Helmer, and they have a perfectly happy looking life. They have 3 children, he has a good job, he's just being promoted, everything's looking great, and they're just getting ready for the Christmas holidays. But then it turns out things might not be quite as happy as they seem. So I went into this play knowing almost nothing about it, and I really enjoyed that experience, so I would recommend this. I'm going to start talking about my opinions on the play, so if you want to read this or see it somewhere, if you can find someone performing it, go see it. Apparently, this is a very famous play, because when I started kind of researching details about it, it's like one of the most performed plays ever, according to some statistic, probably not including Shakespeare and stuff like that, but for a while, it was a very, very popular play. So, go read it, then come back to hear my opinions. So I really liked the way that this play tried to subvert my expectations, and we're used to seeing that a lot now in modern works, but this play was written almost 140 years ago, so it's really fun to see that they came out with this, especially during the Victorian era, because at that point in time, society was kind of restrictive. So, this play opened with this sweet, happy little family having fun, going shopping, getting ready for Christmas, and everyone looks happy and lovely. And then pretty soon you realize that basically every character in this play who gets any amount of dialogue is kind of a horrible person. Their opinions about what's right and wrong seem to change fairly often, and for the most part they are pretty fickle. So, Mrs. Lynde showed up, and she was interesting. She kind of asked a favor of Nora and stuff, and then she was going to try to help Nora out, but then she decided she'd better look out for herself, and the way she chose to look out for herself, getting Krogsgard to marry her, did end up benefiting Nora, but it sounded like, at least of her, what she told Krogsgard is to be believed, then she was kind of abandoning Nora and just thinking about herself. Though she did, kind of have Krogsgard in a place where he wanted to marry her before, so she could have just been taking advantage of someone that she knew was an easy target. So we're not quite sure what's going on there, but either way, she's not the nicest person. And then Krogsgard, we already know, is kind of a criminal and willing to forge bank documents and stuff. And then he is also happily blackmailing Nora, and then when she wasn't responding the way he wanted to, he was going to include her husband in that. But then it was kind of funny, then when he and Mrs. Lynde decide to get married, then he just abandons all that. And I would have been interested to see which of them would have gotten the job, because they both really wanted it. And at this point, Torvald knew that he was in a position to be blackmailed, so I don't know if he would have given Krogsgard the job, or if Mrs. Lynde just would have kept the job, and she could have supported Krogsgard. Somehow I think that was a bit too progressive for this time period, but you never know. I think the nicest character in this book was Dr. Rank. He was just kind of there, he was a good family friend, and then he did the thing where apparently this was common in classic works of literature, because they kind of did the same thing in A Tale of Two Cities, where he just walks up and says, "Nora, I'm here to tell you that I'm deeply and madly in love with you. That's all. I don't want a response. I don't expect anything from you. I'm gonna go now. Bye. Have a nice life." And so I think it's very interesting that he did that. Since I've seen it in other works of fiction too, I'm guessing it was a common thing back then, which is interesting. I don't really know what it accomplishes, but makes the story interesting. And then Nora and Torvald's relationship was very interesting, because it mattered a lot to him that he be the one to look out for Nora and take care of her, and he wanted her to be this silly little person with almost no brains, and Nora knew that and just kind of played along with it, and it was ridiculous, some of the things she did. She just dance around and sing for him, and I've kind of known more mature 5-year-olds. It was amazing how silly she could be, and that was exactly what he wanted from her, and that was how their marriage was built. And, you know, in that opening scene, you hear him talking about, oh, how she spends all this money and it just flits away because she's so silly. And then later you find out that she's been flitting this money away to pay off the loan she took so that she could try to help her husband recover from an illness. And it's amazing that she was just able to do all that and accomplish all these things and still make her husband think that she's just this la-da-da, very ditzy little person who never thinks at all. And I think Torvald was probably my least favorite character because Krogsgard was awful, but he at least knew he was awful. And Torvald was really pompous and clueless and fickle and just kind of ridiculous. You know, he kept saying, oh, I adore my wife, I do anything for her, I love her so much. And then in the third act, you know, he actually gets the letter and finds out Nora's dark secret, that she forged her father's name on a document he would have signed anyway. And he freaks out and starts talking about how their marriage is over and he's never going to let her see their children again, and of course they'll look like they're together for the sake of the neighbors because he wouldn't want anyone to see, but he doesn't trust her, and their, I think, 7-year marriage is just over. And he says that she is an evil person and he'd never let her corrupting influence near their children and he doesn't want to lay eyes on her. And then he gets the second letter, you know, that has the bond or whatever it was in there, and so there's no more evidence and no more scandal, and then he's suddenly fine. He's like, oh, why are you upset, Nora? Everything's good now. And he just expects her to forget that he just hated her and was throwing her out of his house. And so then that feeling you get at the end when he's just given this whole little speech and said, well, I know I was a little bit mad before, but now I'm totally fine and we can go back to normal and I'll take care of you again. Then I loved it when Nora walks up to him and says, no, that's not okay. And you find out that she was hoping, like she really believed that he loved her and would stand by her and take the blame for himself. And she was prepared to stop that, not in the best way possible. But she was going to try to stop that because she really believed that he would do that for her because she would do it for him. And instead he just thought about himself and was trying to kick her out and cover up the scandal. And it was great because she was so mad at him, and she actually called him out on all that stuff. And then she kind of told him she wasn't going to be that silly little girl anymore, and she was going to go off and actually educate herself and learn how to be a responsible adult human being. And so I thought it was amazing that Nora just said, okay, you know what? I need to make myself better, so I am going to go do that. And it's okay to leave my husband because he was going to throw me out. And it's okay to leave my children because my husband just said 5 minutes ago that I wasn't fit to be in the same room with them. So I guess I'm all good now. And then for this time period, that would have been so scandalous. Even like the little introduction, it was just like a little page introduction before the story. But they talked about how scandalous that was for that time. For a wife to just go leave her family and say, I'm gonna go educate myself. And they did kind of leave it on a happy note, you know, that maybe if someday once she had educated herself, they met again, they could, you know, start over and maybe still be a family. But I actually find that fairly unlikely based on how kind of arrogant Torvald is. I feel like he wouldn't be okay with that. And then maybe once Nora was more educated, she would decide she could do better. Though I don't know how possible that actually would have been in Victorian society. That might not have been an option for her. So then it was really interesting, you know, Nora's decision. And you don't really get a comment, like the author doesn't really weigh in much. You don't know if Nora is making a good decision or a bad decision. But you can tell that they're at least going to have a much more honest marriage and a much, if they ever get through all this, then they will have a much stronger relationship. And so it was really interesting, all the different things that this play had to say about Victorian society. So this play had a lot to say about morality. You know, the character of Krogsgard had been disgraced because he was a corrupt businessman, and apparently during that time period, that was enough to ruin your reputation for life. I think as a society we've kind of gotten over that a little bit, and now, you know, coming from like a modern perspective where we see all these movies about these horribly corrupt criminals and stuff, someone who made a tiny little thing on a bank document at some point doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but apparently back then that kind of thing was a much bigger deal than it is now. So I think the thing that I loved most about reading this play was that I've read several different things written in Victorian time periods. I've read Peter Pan, I read a collection of Victorian fairy tales, I've read several different things, and I like them because they're fun and beautiful, but then they tend to be a little shallow, and a lot of the characters tend to be a lot like Nora was when this started out. And so I loved it that this play kind of says, you know, most people aren't really that stupid, and if they're acting like it, it's probably for a reason, and it might not really be how they actually are. They might just be doing what society wants them to do. So I thought that was so amazing, and I thought it was so cool that something like this could be written in the Victorian time period like that. So I really like this play. It gave me a lot to think about, and I think I'll consider it when I'm reading other Victorian works of fiction, you know, kind of compare it to this and see this seems like it really has a lot to say about that kind of thing. This was a great play.